All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm here live with Dara Herring. I'm in DC, and Dara, you're back in Mexico City?
I'm back in Mexico City, yes.
Yes. So we're going to talk about Dara's adventures from the US to Mexico and beyond. So good morning. Good morning, Kathy. Good to see you here. Yay. Oh, sweet. Cousin. Hi, Cuz.
Yes.
Good morning, Deborah Johnson. It's good to be here. Dara is an hour earlier than I am, so I'm really
Two.
too. Oh,
It's
yes.
it's
Okay.
it's 7 a.m. here, so
Thanks for getting up. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate it.
no worries.
So, yes, Dara, tell us. You're in Mexico City and you moved there
Uh,
pretty recently. So maybe can you talk about how, I guess maybe your sort of first time that you thought about moving to Mexico to moving to Mexico, what was that trajectory like?
um, let's see, Kat, you probably remember because I think we met in Rashida's Burnout to Bliss group.
Yeah.
Um, it would probably have been maybe a year ago, maybe
Yeah.
not even quite a year.
Mhm.
Um, Through a variety of circumstances, I wound up on YouTube and caught a video about Rashida Dow with CNBC retiring at 39 and moving to Mexico City. That's the
Mhm.
first time I ever thought about Mexico City, other
Mhm.
than the movie with Denzel, Man on Fire, which you had Mexico City in the background and like that hazy gold
Mm,
tone that movies give to Mexico City. That always kind of stuck with me, the
mm,
architecture. But anyway,
mm,
um, saw that video, and then of course YouTube started serving up other videos of hers and Stephanie Perry and Adelia Borsade, and I was feeling like I was in a place where I was really just kind of at my wits end with my job. Really burnt out, working way too many hours, waking up in the middle of the night, grinding my teeth, like the whole
mm,
nine. And pandemic, of course, made everything worse. Um, and, you know, there was all this talk about this thing called a sabbatical, right? And I'm familiar with sabbaticals. I work for companies that offer a sabbatical after so many years. Um, and then, I was like, that's what I need. I need a break.
mm,
Like, I need
mhm,
a nice, sustained break. I got great vacation time from my company, but my plan was 3 months. I'm going to give myself a 3-month sabbatical at the beginning of 2023. And then I'll come back refreshed, renewed, able to better set boundaries, and can work on designing a life that works more effectively for me. Joined Rashida's class. I think I met you in the first session. It's the first time we talked one-on-one.
mhm,
And I would say by my second group meeting, I was like, oh no, not sabbatical. I am leaving. I'm not
mm,
working anymore. I've given way too much of myself to this company, and to making it money, as
mhm,
well as supporting the people around me that I worked with. It was too much. It was time for me to go. So I put a plan into motion that when I got my bonus at the beginning of 2023, that I would be leaving right thereafter. And yeah, I think I got my bonus on Thursday. My manager was out on Friday, so I gave notice on Monday. And
Ah.
gave notice. I worked for about 3 weeks, and then a month later, through a lot of blood, sweat, tears, hugs, rescheduled flights, I was in Mexico City.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah, there was a
So you
lot of
gave
logistics.
notice. Yes, gave notice. 3 weeks later, you were in Mexico City.
Gave
Something like
notice
that? Mhm.
3 weeks later, gave notice 3 weeks later, stopped working.
Mm,
A month later,
mm,
moved out of my house
mhm.
and was living in Mexico City, me and my little dog.
Wow. That's incredible how quickly that like, once you decide that you're going to do it, how
Yeah.
quickly it could happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because once I made the decision that it was going to be permanent and not a 3-month not vacation, sorry, not a 3-month sabbatical,
Mhm.
um, then it just became a function of like checking boxes, and one of the
Mm.
things, I've worked in product development in the health insurance and other health related startup environments. And I've worked quite a bit in product development. So, taking a concept from, the whiteboard to some degree to reality, and then also quite a bit in project management and execution. And first, I should probably have asked you this at the start. What's the level of uh, verbal creativity that I can use? I have a mouth like a sailor a little bit, so I just
Oh, I
don't
I
want
guess, like, I think YouTube might flag it if we have, like, too colorful, I think, but
I'll keep
I
it
personally don't have a problem with it, but,
I'll keep it clean. I don't want to affect your your channel. Um, but like I can at least say hell. I can execute the hell out of things, right? Like if something
Mhm.
needs to get done, I will execute it, and I
Mhm.
won't sleep until it is accomplished. So once I decided that I was taking my sabbatical, and part of the sabbatical for me was checking out Mexico City. Hearing so much about it, it felt like the kind of vibrant place that I needed to be, because what I didn't want to do was spend 3 months sort of stewing in my own juices, right? Like I
Mm.
wanted to be at a place that was energizing. I've gotten into making art over the last couple of years, and so I wanted to be inspired. And I said, that
Mm.
sounds like a colorful place. I've always wanted to learn a second language. I was actually a Spanish minor in college for whatever good it
Mm.
does me now. And I said, well, let's try Mexico City. So I told my company I was going for 6 weeks to take a sabbatical. I mean, sorry, to work abroad.
Okay.
And they knew that I was unhappy. That there
Mm.
one thing I was not was a wilting violet. I was very clear
Mhm.
that I was
Mm.
overworked, understaffed, that the goals were unrealistic, and so they
Mm.
were just happy if I was happy. So you want to go work in
Mhm.
Mexico for 6 weeks? Go work in Mexico for 6 weeks. And I
Mm.
figured, well, if I'm coming for 6 weeks, I might as well get my residency.
Mhm.
So I started the process. And so I landed in Mexico City for my scouting trip. It was then a scouting trip for the 6 weeks. I landed on a Sunday. By Monday, within 24 hours, I had my green card, because I just lined
Your temporary residency card. Yes?
oh,
Temporary or permanent?
yeah, temporary. Yeah,
Mhm.
but it's
Mhm.
it is green card.
Mhm.
It's so early. I was like, did I say the wrong thing? But yes, my green card temporary status for 1 year.
Okay. All right.
And I talked to a friend later, and he was like, "Oh, that was your second time back." I was like, "No, it was my first time." But I
Mhm.
figured, what the heck, I'll go ahead and get it. I knew what the
Mhm.
process was by that part. By that point, I'd
Mhm.
already started it before I left the states. And one of the things that has been a reoccurring theme through this process is when I decided I wanted to do something, the chips fell into place. And it
Yeah.
was very, very easy. Um, and so, I started out my first day walking around Mexico City with my dog for 6 weeks, with a
Mhm.
residency card.
Mhm.
So it was like, okay, this really could, be home.
Yeah.
And I actually had my niece come and visit me, who's a tattoo artist, and I
Mm.
got a tattoo to sort of represent this next phase of my life.
No.
My aunt, I mean, my cousin, who I know is on here, is going to say she is probably aware of this. My mother used to always say that, no grass grows under my feet. So whenever I
Mm.
make a do something, I do it. So that's
Yeah,
my
what
new
is it?
little.
Let me see.
Oh, it's my
Yeah,
shirt
bring
is
it up.
covering that.
Yeah, bring it
It,
close to the
it
cam.
just says
Yeah.
you can't see it, the whole
Yeah.
thing. I'm
No.
looking backwards here, but it's
Okay,
just a
yeah.
whole tattoo that runs down my arm that says "No grass grows under her feet."
Oh, that's nice.
So it was kind of in honor of her, and just sort of
Yeah.
um, acknowledging this big change that I made. Because as many professional accolades as I've had in my life, I have to say, this is the first time I really feel very proud of me, and can say
Mhm.
that with kind of my whole chest. So.
Yeah. It's interesting how you took your project management skills and turned them, they'd been focused on your employer, and then you turn them back on yourself and you
Mhm.
just like you organized, you project managed this move, which, man, if you ever wanted to do another side hustle, project managing people's moves. Okay, I'm just saying. Not
Well, and let's say this though too, because I got such an early start from my perspective, I thought everything was going swimmingly. When it got down to the end, that last like 2 weeks, it was an absolute nightmare,
Mm,
like just so much stuff. And
mhm,
I'd been downsizing and giving away. I had,
mhm.
donation pickups at my house every month, and it was still not
Yeah.
enough. And
Mhm,
so, while I thought I had a solid game plan, I fell back to, which unfortunately was, I think, a lot of what I'd done in my career as well, was just sucking it up, grinning and bearing it.
mhm,
I didn't sleep, when it
mm.
came down to it. But at least in this situation, it was me doing it because of something that was to my benefit.
Yes, a goal yes, that you could really get behind.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Okay, so how did you figure out where in the city you wanted to live, and how did you find the place where you would be living?
Yeah. So now many of us who move abroad, there's this whole conversation about, are you a minimalist? Are you a maximalist? I'm definitely more of a maximalist. Shipping things belonging to Mexico isn't really a thing. It's quite a bit of a hassle, administrative nightmare if you actually try to ship things.
Mhm,
And, you may not get your things in the state that you want them to be in,
mhm,
when they're delivered. So I said, I'll downsize and I'll take things in suitcases. I'll take a couple trips. Well, those couple of trips turned into maybe four trips,
okay, okay.
four trips, four bags, and then a couple of other so I have a lot of stuff here. But in making all of those trips, what I did was not walk the neighborhoods.
Mhm,
I walked the neighborhoods. I stayed originally in Condessa for the first 6 weeks, my scouting trip last year, which was wonderful. Condessa it's very, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, it's very
mhm.
seductive. Um,
Yes, it is.
it's, lots of parks and greenery and
Mhm,
and you get that in other places of the city, but in
mhm.
Condessa, it's super concentrated,
Yeah.
right? Lots of restaurants,
Mhm,
bookstores, cafe.
mhm,
It's so easy to get lulled in there. You
mhm,
also hear a lot of English in Condessa.
mm.
So there's a lot of uh, digital nomads. There's a lot of immigrants like myself, tourists that are in the Condessa area. And I really wanted to force myself to be in a situation where I had to somehow pull up from the cobwebs, that Spanish that I
Mhm,
studied when I was in college many, many, many
mhm,
moons ago.
mhm.
And so I said, well, let me not, sort of focus so much on Condessa and Roma Norte, where a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
immigrants and I use the word immigrant rather than expat. I
Yeah.
like, at least for myself, because I don't know that I ever intend to go back to the United States.
Mhm.
And coming from the US, where immigrant has been given such a dirty word, which is hilarious when you think about how the United States was formed, right? And the
Yeah.
people that are
Yeah.
there, that many of which were lucky enough to come by choice, and some of us
Yeah.
did not.
Mhm.
But I wanted to be someplace where there was less of a touristy feel. And so
Mhm.
I walked the neighborhoods, and that's what you do in
Mm.
Mexico City. To find an apartment, you walk the neighborhoods.
Mm.
I grew up in West Philadelphia, and I used to always say you had to take West Philly on a block by block basis.
Mhm.
Mexico City is very much the same, especially if you
Mhm.
move out of your Condesas and Roman Nortes. So I
Mhm.
walked the streets with friends
Nice.
of mine, and we looked at buildings, and you see for rent signs, and you take photos. I was introduced to an agent who is now a very dear friend of mine. And she would make the phone calls for me, talk to the agents, find out, any special provisions, could I bring my dogs, that sort of thing. And through that process, I found the place that I'm in now. I love it.
Oh, good.
It is a little noisy. Mexico City is not a quiet place.
Yes.
But it gives me the space that I had that I wanted. I have
Mhm.
outdoor space,
Mm.
and I am in a very residential neighborhood. I mean,
Mhm.
it's full of families and lots of single family homes, actually.
Nice. Nice. So, yeah, so that's fantastic that you found a place and you did that. The folks that you were walking around with, they were, Mexico City natives or people who are they're Mexican or
No, they were actually
Mhm.
friends of mine that I've met here, that are
Mhm.
also from the US.
Okay.
So, in particular, the guy that I met, we were in the same sort of, I'll say, cohort for the facilitator that helped us get our residency card. So
Mhm.
now he's like my Mexico City bestie. It was
Oh, sweet.
mostly the two of us that were like, walking for like an hour every day
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
more.
Okay, so he was also looking for a place?
He'd found one
Okay.
already, but he was just
Mhm.
keeping me company, and
Oh,
he
that's
liked
nice.
to
Okay.
walk,
Mhm.
and so he had already said, "Oh, well, you should check out this area, or this is a
Mhm.
block I've been down that I think you would like." So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I did have
Okay.
somebody local helping in the actual conversations.
Yeah. So let's talk about the pros and cons of Mexico City. Like, what drew you to it? You said it's inspiring. It's, kind of never a dull moment. Like you're not just doing in there's always something that you can do in the city. New people to meet, places to go, museums, restaurants to check out. But sort of maybe talk about the feel. Like, how did it feel for you to be in Mexico City?
Um, it feels electric, I guess, is one way
Mm.
I would think. That's the first word that came into my head. There's an energy, there's a pulse to the city
Mhm.
that I think you get in other places. There are times when Mexico City reminds me quite a bit of New York City, but
Mhm.
I say always with much nicer people. I mean, collectively,
Yeah.
I grew up in the city of brotherly love, right? Like you had to have a tough skin there,
Mm.
and you have to have a bit of a tough skin in New York City.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the pace and the number of people around, when you're commuting back and forth to work, you put your blinders on, right? You,
Mhm.
you kind of
Mhm.
stay focused. And while you do get a lot of the same in Mexico City, I think the culture of the people here also seems to lend itself more towards the um, being focused a lot more on the collective rather
Mm.
than each individual, right? Um, and I live in a place where it's fairly close to like public transportation. So in the morning, if I happen to be up, which rarely happens, and
Again,
I'm
thank you.
oh no worries, no worries. Of all the things to be able to have to set an alarm for, this was
Yeah.
not a problem.
Okay, good.
But when I'm out and I see, commuters walking around, it is very much like, your Bostons, your New Yorks,
Mm.
Chicago's. But there is a yes, Kathy, you said it. It is a bit of a more of a warm and fuzzy feel. And what I've learned through making some local friends here is while Mexicans work really, really hard. I think Adelia in one of her videos says that there's been a global study that talks about the people in Mexico work harder than any other country in the world. Um,
Yes,
and
I see that. I see that, and it just that whole sort of trope of Mexicans being lazy and that just ooh. I mean, when you see people getting up, they like people getting up so early. I just remember when I had a flight, really early flight in Mexico City, um, and I was like, "Oh, it's dark. It's still dark." And people were commuting to their jobs. I mean, they might seem like they're lazy because at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're tired and they're done and they've been working for hours and hours. But yes, I'm seeing Mexicans work really, really hard.
Right, right. And I would say like I actually don't see a lot of people that stop working at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of people, we would in the US call it a side hustle on top of a side hustle on
Mm,
top of a side
mm,
hustle. No, that's just life. But the difference that I've seen through my friends that I've met here is this sort of joie de vivre. I should
Mhm.
probably learn how to say that in Spanish.
Joie de
Oh,
vivre. Yeah.
viva la vida, right? Um, it, the work doesn't suck the life out of them. It is a
Mm,
means to an end. And I know
mm,
that in the US, we say this all the time, right? Like, other people work to live and we live to work, and it's very, very true. My friend who's an agent, she works crazy hours. She's got like 4 jobs she's juggling all the time. But one
mhm,
of the things you'll see here, she'll, oh, do you want to meet me at this time for a coffee in the middle of
mhm,
the afternoon? Very much a cafe culture.
mm,
When we think cafe culture, people think of Paris or other European cities. This is very much a cafe culture where
mm,
folks will sit down and enjoy each other's company over a cafe or a michelada or a
mhm,
margarita, some of my favorite things. And they'll just sit and talk and,
mhm,
connect with each other. And it's
mhm,
not a constant exercise in looking at their watch,
mm.
even though they are working so many hours. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things that we're missing in the US is that connection,
Mm.
and even if it's only temporary, like a temporary level of community.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Adalia's here. Yes, I know. It's early there. Thank you for thank you, Adalia. Thank you so much. We had a comment from Professor LCH, the sort of feeling of being proud, like taking that time to be like, I just did this thing and I'm really happy that I did this thing. I love it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. That's huge for me because
Mhm,
and it's funny, my company that I worked for, they were very invested in keeping me. I had
mm,
a career coach for a year. I was in a program with McKinsey. I was always being promoted for various initiatives and programs and
mhm,
offerings and things
mhm.
like that. Even though I was 100% clear, don't put me on your succession plan. I don't want to be anybody's. I was not looking for growth. So, you'd have
Yes,
those
that is the
discussions
thing.
around like career development, and
Right?
mine was like,
Exactly. It's so funny. It's
I'm
so
not, I'm not
funny.
in
Where do you see yourself? I'm like, elsewhere? I see myself elsewhere?
it. Exactly. So they were very clear, but they were giving me these things. And I think
Mhm,
it was like, oh, we value you. And,
mhm,
here's some tools to help you or whatever,
mhm, mhm,
um, which was great. And the career coach that I worked with, one of the things we talked about at the very beginning was like how much through so much of my career I had what seems to be the sort of classic imposter syndrome.
mhm,
And working with her on top of doing this other work, preparing for this move, I realized I legit had imposter syndrome because I
mhm,
was indeed an imposter. I had been acting. See, this is where it's going to start to get hard for me to like not bring my sailor language in, but I had been acting for years trying to fit my square behind into a round hole. And I didn't know it, that I
mm.
was wearing a costume and that I
Yeah.
was following a script.
Mhm,
And because of that, every time there was a huge pat on the back or like, oh my gosh, look at this accomplishment, you must be so proud. It
mhm,
like, like I'd cringe a little bit because I wasn't
mhm.
proud. And
Right.
and in part it was because I think on some level I knew that it was all an act and it took so much energy out of me to
Mm,
pretend, to smile,
mhm.
to act like I gave a damn. And
Yes.
and I did that. I mean, that part of the problem was that like I gave too much of a damn,
Mm,
but I couldn't. Yeah, Kevin. I mean, it almost wasn't even code switching. It
mhm,
almost just became kind of who I was, and I lost me in the
mhm,
midst of it.
mhm,
And so it for me, it's a really big deal to be able to say that I'm very proud of myself now because I
mhm,
don't think I've ever been really proud before because on some level, either I knew what I was giving away of myself in order to accomplish these things for other people, or I just knew that it was being the accomplishments were being produced by this fake Dara, this Dara
mhm.
avatar or something.
Yeah. Oh, we have a guest, special guest.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Um, And so it's funny, while I say I'm very proud of myself, the moving to Mexico City part, I feel like this it was like the lowest risk thing that I did. Like, to
Oh,
me,
really?
it didn't feel like that big of a deal.
Mm.
Bigger, I think, was checking out of the American dream from a
Yeah.
work environment perspective. That to me was the bigger deal. You
Mhm.
know, getting rid of all my things, packing up, moving to a country where I don't speak the language, I don't know the culture, where eh, big deal. Who cares? Because
Yeah.
that's a thing that you can undo.
Mhm.
It was the undoing of who I used to be in terms of corporate America. That was bigger. I look back at pictures from, like, corporate headshots. I'm like, who is that person?
Wow.
Like,
Yeah, I watched a TED Talk recently about why Black women, people of color, it doesn't make sense for us to bring our authentic selves to work, because it's not really welcome. Like, they say that it's welcome, you're welcome to bring your whole self, but when you try to do that, you get the backlash.
or you get, because one of the things that I promised myself in my last role was that I was going to bring my whole self to work. And
Mhm.
I did.
Okay.
And it was welcomed, but
Mhm.
it led to a different level of labor for me, right?
Mhm.
Because then I was the one that folks wanted to talk to about.
Oh, no.
Exactly, right?
Oh,
So I
no.
so I wound up on our diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Uh,
committee for the entire organization. I was
mhm.
speaking at, with groups in Canada, and so it wound up just being an additional
Mhm.
layer of labor.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, okay, so that's what I get for bringing my whole self to the table.
Yes. Let's
Let's
no.
let's give me one more job responsibility,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And it's funny because right before I left, they didn't know, but I knew. I was actually trying to set them up for success. So I'm like, I've needed another person, and we need someone else on the team.
Mhm.
And budgets, blah, blah, blah. So finally, when I said, well, I'm stepping down from our DE&I
Yep.
board. Well, why don't we go ahead and approve that head count? Oh, isn't that
Okay.
interesting,
Here we
right?
go. Mhm.
Um, and things didn't kind of come together the way that they could have.
Yeah.
But my thing was, hey, if you had listened to me, you would have been in a much better position when I finally left. Which I think I'm still on their employee roles. Like, they wouldn't actually let me quit.
Okay. Do you get a bonus for that?
No, no, and it's a loose arrangement. It basically is.
Okay.
It was kind of like, can will this give us access to being able to call you in so many months to ask you if you want to come back? And it would be easy for you to do that if we kind of keep you in this sort
I
of
see. I see.
leave of
Yeah.
absence position. And I had a couple of friends actually say to me, wow, they didn't accept your resignation, essentially. You must feel really proud. That means you did a lot of great work with them. And I'm like, no, actually, it reinforces my decision because it tells me that's how much of myself I gave away,
Mhm.
that they cannot imagine being able to move forward
Right.
without me. And I'm not saying that from the perspective of, like, oh, I'm this, magician, but really from the perspective of, what other sucker are you going to find who is competent,
Mm.
A, like competent enough, and then B, I say this tongue in cheek, dumb enough to
Mhm.
work the kind of hours that
Mm-mm.
I was working,
Yeah.
and being effective at the same time,
Mhm.
in what is really a kind of crazy environment. I've been in a couple situations where um, I was responsible for helping to bring to market a solution as a result of an acquisition.
Mhm.
And I was like, I had the first one that went disastrously. And then I'm like, I'm back in that same situation again.
Mhm.
And, I knew that there were ways in which I could have changed my way of work, could have set better boundaries. I could have, pulled back and not identified my own self-worth so much with the work that I was doing, blah, 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 blah. Or I'm 51 years old. How about we stop trying to teach this old dog new tricks? And I
Yeah.
just remove myself from these situations that seem to keep recurring, and then the problem will be solved.
Yes. So fast forward, you're settled here and you've removed yourself from that situation. How do you remove the situation from yourself? Like, because there are probably threads of that overwork, code switching, or like bringing whatever. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get that out of you now that you're in a new situation?
It's been amazingly easy.
Mm,
I have found it not so much to be a process at all. And I thought it would be a process. Like, this is just so ingrained. I have this work ethic. No, it has not been a problem. One of the things I've always joked about is that I know in a past life I was royalty, which is, I think, one of the struggles that I had in this life in terms of having to actually labor. Like, what is this?
mm,
Um, but no, it's been deceptively easy. And I think part of it has been because of the fact that I discovered this love of like art and creating. And so that's the thing that I happily run to every morning,
mhm,
right? So while there was a degree of running away, and maybe running away feels like the wrong term to use, it was a conscious, intentional striding away from, the American dream, corporate life. I and indeed ran to being able to sit down and create every day. And
right.
so, the one thing every night when I go to bed, I do pause because my first thought was always go to bed. How many hours can I manage to fit in of sleep before I get up in the morning and then use that to base like, okay, when I'm going to set
Mhm,
my alarm is like
mhm.
it's always like this whole exercise. What's the latest I can sleep so I can give myself
Yep.
some time in the morning before I start my
Mhm,
calls, blah, blah, blah. And every night I
mhm.
go to bed and I'm like, "Oh, I don't have to set my watch.
I
Like, this is
know.
wonderful." So I
Mm,
don't set alarms.
yes.
That's
That's
the
lovely.
biggest thing that like yeah,
That's
yeah. I mean,
actually
that's
kind
the
of the
biggest thing. It
dream.
reminds me of my past life.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, there's a little delay, but that's okay, keep going. Uh-oh, you
Okay.
paused.
Yes, a delay.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Hopefully caught up. Okay, great. Um, so that's really been the only thing that's been like a little bit of a hiccup in my day. I have eased into ease
Mm,
with no problems whatsoever. My routine generally get up in the morning, whatever time that happens to be, take the dog out, we go on a
mhm,
walk, come back in. After I buy juice from the guy in the corner, I make my coffee, I do my morning pages, and
mm,
then I go to my studio and I sit
mm,
down and I, do my little watercolor doodling or just playing around in paints with my hands on canvas or on paper or whatever. And to me, it's
mhm,
not so much about producing a thing, it's more the process.
yeah.
And it's my meditation, it's my happy place. And I can sit there and play for hours.
Wow.
Sometimes folks will say, "Oh, do you want to come out for a drink?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'll make one here and continue to
Aw.
play."
So how did you get into were you doing art before, or is this something new, or how did you get into it?
So that's an interesting story. And I don't know how long your videos usually are, Kat, because I could keep you here running your mouth forever. But no, years ago, I was working for a startup and wound up, I'll say from my perspective, being a bit of a fall guy for a product launch that went bad through an acquisition. I wound up working myself so hard that
Mm,
I got sick. And it was at
wow.
that point, and I know it was this specific situation, I wound up being diagnosed with lupus.
Mm,
Um, I was let go of the job on Monday, and I was let go because I'd gotten sick and wound up in the ER. And it was an application where I, clearly kept saying, this thing is not working the way that it was intended. Here's some things we need to do. And it was like, well, the board and the acquisition and it has to happen or whatever. So I was holding this thing together with bubble gum and band-aids, like manually, physically myself. And when I wound up in the ER, what happens? It fell apart the way that I said it was going to fall apart. So because that happened, then it's, oh, Daras ineffective, So
Ay,
long
ay,
story
ay.
short, I got let go on Monday. That Wednesday, I was diagnosed with lupus. And I
Wow, shit.
knew that it was that job. Exactly. So
Mm,
I wound up being out of work, sick for about a year.
mm.
And I started watching YouTube for some reason. I don't know. I started
As
watching
one does.
as what but it was just random. I started watching YouTube and discovered this concept called art journaling, which
Mm,
was, interesting to me. It was anything from, like, on one end of the scale could be just like putting a wash of watercolor on a page and then journaling.
mm,
And then all the way to like these really realistic drawings and, but you could do sticker, anything. It's just creating anything on a page that represented how you were feeling with some degree of writing and art
mhm,
and color or whatever.
mm,
And I would just watch these videos. And I had put all of my stuff in storage. I'd moved in with my sister for a short period of time. And one day she came home from work and she was like, here. And I was like, what? She's like, well, you sit and watch these videos all the time. Why don't you do something? So she gave me this little watercolor set. And that was
mhm.
that started it all out. And
Oh,
that was one of the things I actually got rid of as I was moving here, because it had a lot of sentimental value and I didn't want to let it go, because now, like, I've moved to the point where I've actually sold work. So,
mm,
but if it was not for that little watercolor set, if it was not for that horrible job, all of those things sort of coming together, I wouldn't have this newfound passion in my life that I've never
mhm,
had for, anything else except, when I
mm.
was the what do you call it? The choir and theater kid growing up.
Okay. We have a question.
Mhm.
Do you find that your new environment, Mexico City, lends itself well to painting more so than the US?
Definitely,
Mm,
definitely. And I think I got at this, the fact that, well, first of all, the fact that I'm not working, and if I was in the US, I would have to be working. That's a big deal. The other thing is, I do think, and it's so funny when I talk about being an artist, right? Like now, it feels very lofty, but um, I think a lot of people, what inspires them is very different.
mhm,
I find this city to be very inspiring. I find the energy to be very inspiring. I think that if I were at a beach, I might just lay around all day. you
mhm,
know, Here, when I think about all of the museums that are in the city, and I've only scratched the surface, I've only scratched the surface. If I'm ever lacking for inspiration, I know I can, hop on the trolley bus and go
yeah,
somewhere and, just spend a day looking at what others have created. And I know that that's going to give me more, fuel for the fire.
yes. So
But
Mexico City has the most museums of any city in the world.
And I tell people that, and they're amazed. Now, we know, right? Some of it, it's like the Postal Museum, or, it's like little quirk, but it's a museum.
Mhm.
And as a matter of fact, someone here, who is in our chat,
Mhm.
just told me about a watercolor museum that I now
Oh,
have to go check out.
nice.
So, I'm still getting settled in.
Yeah.
And right now it's like I don't need that external inspiration.
Mhm.
For me, it's just like I almost don't even want to go anywhere. I'm allowing myself to do nothing but sit in sweatpants and
Mm.
drink coffee in the morning. And
Mhm.
that's enough for me right
Okay. So I think I know the answer to this question then. Have you connected with any other artists or artists art community in the city?
now. To some degree, not as much as I intend to. There are, one thing about moving to Mexico City, and I know it's in other places as well, there are so many WhatsApp groups. There's a
Mhm.
WhatsApp group for anything and everything you might want, to the point that it's like I have to turn off all of the alerts because it's annoying. It drives my
Yeah.
ADHD into
No
overdrive.
alerts. Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh. But there is a couple of there are a couple creative groups that I do intend to connect with. One of them has a meetup every Monday, and it just so turns out that like it just hasn't worked for me in terms of
Mhm.
scheduling. But I'm hoping this upcoming Monday I can meet them. It's just like a little meetup, get together, bring your stuff, let's all work
Mm.
at a sort of gallery slash co-working space.
Mhm.
And it's owned by a friend of a friend anyway. So I've been wanting to get over there to meet them. So that's going to be my first step into that space. And I'm hoping that that will help me further get connected into the artist community here. Because again, even just saying that I want to be a part of an artist community, for me, it was like, this was my stress relief,
Mm.
and now I've moved into saying like, this is actually who I am.
Yes. I wanted to mention, so Rebloom Room is I haven't introduced myself, but Rebloom Room is a place where we discuss ways that Black and Brown women can bring more joy into our lives, whether it's through international travel, taking naps, raising teenagers. Hello. Yeah, and so I'm collaborating with Kathy Hampton of Wellside Retreats, and we are putting together an urban retreat in Mexico City in October. October, what are the dates? I wrote them down, 18th through 24th. And the theme is um, rest, connect, and explore. And one of the offerings that we will be doing during our retreat is a workshop with Dara. So do you want to talk a little bit about it? Just like very briefly, kind of overview of what we'll be doing in our workshop.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, first of all, I love the theme because that pretty much is my theme for the year. So I should
Yay.
probably just claim that.
Excited.
But so art journaling was kind of how I stepped into the space. I now will do works on large canvases. I
Mm,
love abstracts, which is in hindsight no surprise because I was always such a perfectionist. And wanting to be so accurate, that this place of freedom where there is no right or and there is no wrong.
mm,
You create something on what was a blank sheet of paper or blank canvas that wasn't there before you, that doesn't have to have any meaning for anybody but you. It
mhm,
almost doesn't matter what it looks like. It's more about how it felt like when you were creating it. And to me, that's what I'm wanting to help people tap into through these art journaling workshops. So I've done a couple of these in the past. And it really is about getting us back to that place of play. You walk into
mm,
a first grade class and you say, hey, who here is a great artist? Every kid is going to raise their hand. You cannot get adults to accept the fact that they have creativity in them. I mean, it's by force. You almost have to do it. I'm not artistic. I'm not creative. You are creative, and I've had to, through these kinds of workshops, had to have this conversation with people to say, well, what do you do for a living? You're consulting. Okay. So you solve problems. How do you solve problems? You use your creativity, right? And it's just really enriching to see people who are almost afraid to put pen to paper,
mm,
and by the end of a couple of hours they're not ready to wrap up. you
nice.
know and part of it is getting people to understand that like creative doesn't necessarily equal artistic.
Mhm,
Artistic is by definition even subjective. But basically it's, how can you best express yourself? And, I use prompts to, help folks that get stuck, like think about a time when, how would you best represent this kind of a feeling? And it can be anything from drawing to watercolor, like washes that takes no artistic talent or skill, to collage. It's a lot of multimedia techniques, and it's really
mhm,
about like, here are all these materials, let's
mm.
play.
Yay.
And then at the end of a session, if you can walk away with a journal that,
Mm.
you started, that you can tell when you look at it, it belongs to you,
Mm.
whether you continue the sort of creative part of that, or if it just becomes a journal that you use to, write your thoughts or use as a gratitude journal, you've created something that when you look at it, you remember that time that you let go.
Mm.
And that's
Yes.
something that I don't think we do enough. We don't
Mhm.
let go.
Nice. Yes, and so you have that feeling of, "Here, I did this and it was fun and I let it flow," and then you
Mhm.
see that again and you open the journal and hopefully you can do that again and again.
Exactly.
Yay. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to this workshop.
I'm looking forward to it too, because it's like every time that I help someone through, one of these like exercises, it reinvigorates the joy that the process
Mhm.
brings, even for me as well. So
Mhm.
it's like, it's a twofer. Big time.
Yay. I wanted to ask you about an excursion that you did recently.
Oh,
Because I saw your Insta stories and I was like, my eyes were like, "Ooh, I want more." So tell us about your sailing adventure.
yeah. So I just got back from a sailing trip. It was, I think, all told, I mean, who knows days anymore? I don't know.
Mhm.
But it was, I think we were on the boat for 8 days, I think. And so there's a whole community of Black sailors across the US. There, there's a variety of different sort of groups and formations, but um, initially, a large part of the start, there was a Black Boater Summit.
Hmm.
And I'm not the one that has all the history on it, because, my thing was like, hey, I'm just here to play. Half the time, I don't even know where we're going. I have a
Mm,
friend of mine who is very active in the group. And,
mhm.
I'm like, where are we going this year? When do I pay my money, and to
Mm,
whom?
mm.
I
I'm
took my
writing some Black Boating Summit. Okay.
Well, yeah, if you're interested, let me know. But I took my first trip in 2013. A friend of
Mm,
mine, she had gone the previous year, and she was like, "Oh, I knew I could ask you, because you have the time, and whenever there's some new adventure, you're down." So
mhm,
we went on this trip, and it's very interesting because it almost doesn't feel like a vacation. And the friends of mine who know me well, who know my theory on me having been royalty in a past life, they're like,
mhm.
you're going on a sailing trip where your crew, so
Mm, mm.
we sail the boat, you
Okay,
know.
nice.
And they're like, I'm like, yeah. So it's like the closest that I think I will ever come to camping,
Mhm,
because you're, so it's, the boats are beautiful, they're usually like 45 to 55-foot catamarans,
mm,
4 to
mm,
6 cabins, each
mhm,
cabin with its own bathroom.
mhm,
They're beautiful boats.
mhm.
But we clean them, we cook,
Yes,
we
yes.
sail,
And sleeping on a boat, the rooms
Mhm.
are small, right? They're like yes?
They are, it's just, so hard for me to kind of look at it from an outside perspective though now, because it's
Mhm,
like one of my favorite things in the world to do.
mm,
The
mhm.
cabins are small, but you don't spend much time in your cabin.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the best sleep that I have gotten since I was an infant, I am sure. Like,
Mm,
something about sleeping with like that gentle rocking of the waves.
mm,
Um, it's amazing.
mhm.
And funny enough, I have actually gotten some women into doing art journaling when I've been on some of the sailing trips, because
Oh my gosh.
I
That
usually
sounds phenomenal.
I usually take my stuff with me, and my friend
Mm,
who arranged our trip this year, we were going to do something kind of formal, and just things got really hectic at the end. And I just told her, I said, you have so many other things on your plate. Like, let's not try to formalize it this year. We're going to try to do
mhm,
something more formal next year.
mhm,
Um, but yes, we do the work, but the sunrises and the sunsets alone make up for it.
mhm,
And the other thing is, we charter the boat, so it's very similar to renting a car.
mhm,
When you divide it up among so many people, it's not that expensive of
mhm,
an
mhm,
endeavor. It seems like it's one of those things that can be very out of reach,
mhm,
but it really isn't. I would say often, I'd spend more on the flight to get to
Right.
wherever it is we're going to sail around than I
Okay.
do on my portion of the charter. And I think
Mhm.
next year we're on tap for the Seychelles.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. So where did you go this time? Where were you?
Oh yeah, we were in the British Virgin Islands.
Mhm.
So
So
we flew to St. Thomas and then took
okay.
the ferry over to Tortola. We all
Mhm.
picked up our boats and then sailed around the various islands. There were about 12 of us, 12 catamarans.
Oh, wow, 12 boats. Okay,
Mhm.
wow.
Yeah. So, that's
And
it,
all black sailors?
yeah.
I'm a Pisces. I love the ocean. This is like
Then we'll have to talk, Kat.
yes. My body's energized right now. These are like the energy spikes. Whoa, it's beautiful. Okay. Yes.
So
Also, I have lineage in the Bahamas, so it's like
we did the Abacos Islands one year. Off the
yes.
coast.
Sounds oh my gosh. Yes. I don't know if you still have it up on your Instagram. I know there's a lot of your art on your Instagram. Um, but yeah, what is your Instagram anyway? Let's I can put that in the chat. What's your
Sure.
handle?
It's Dara
Mhm,
underscore herring
mhm.
underscore art.
Okay.
And funny that you mentioned that because
Mhm,
I actually was on my list of to-dos yesterday that didn't get too done. But
mhm.
I want to put together a reel from the
Oh,
sailing
yeah.
trip. So, because
Yes.
I use my Instagram as a bit of my own personal photo album. So I'll be putting up a
Yes.
reel because I want to be able to just look back instead of having to go through a bunch of photos. And
Mhm,
I have the benefit of my friend who got me into sailing. She happens to be a photographer, so she takes
mhm.
the best photos. So as she started to share those, I'm like, oh, I need to steal some of those to work into my own little, reel.
Beautiful. That's exciting. That's very
Well,
exciting.
we'll definitely talk more about that because it sounds like that's something that could be right up your alley.
It really is. I wanted to find the link for people to sign up for so there's yours, and then I'm also gonna add in the chat, a link if people are interested in signing up for the wait list for the, retreat in Mexico City in October. So yay.
And Kat,
Yes.
I
Mhm,
realized there was a question I didn't fully answer
mhm,
earlier. You asked about sort of the pros and the cons.
mhm.
And I
Yes,
think, the
of
major
Mexico City. Mhm.
yeah, the major pro I gave you was like the energy.
Yeah.
I would say cons, some people complain about traffic.
Mhm.
Traffic is crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a character. It's a character in the city. It's like you are dealing with it. Hello, traffic. Yeah.
it is. It so doesn't bother me because where am I
Mm.
going? Right? Like
Mhm.
happy hour, you
'Cause you
know.
like your neighborhood. I think it's super important when you're in Mexico City because it's so big that you
Mhm.
like the neighborhood that you are actually living in. I think that's super important because it's not like you're gonna be, "Well, I'm just here, but then I've spent time over there." Probably more important to like your neighborhood in Mexico City.
Yeah, and I think to have a good understanding on like what are your daily patterns going to look like? Like there's no
Mhm.
place I need to be in the
Mhm.
mornings,
Mhm.
The biggest stress is, oh, am I going to be able to make it to our dinner reservation on time? You know,
Mhm.
and where I
Mhm.
happen to be positioned, that hasn't been a problem.
Yeah.
And so traffic is not a big one for me. Noise is a noisy city. Um,
Mhm.
I don't think that bothers me so much.
What
Um,
kind of noise?
oh, there's all kinds of noises.
Mhm.
There's street noise, like cars, like
Mhm.
constantly.
Mhm.
There is just like the trash man and the guy that sells the sweet potatoes and the folks that come through to pick up, I wouldn't call them donations, but junk, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's constant,
Mhm.
I hear the sweet potato man whistle come through. It's like 10:30 at night. I'm like, who's buying sweet potatoes, right? Or the
It's
tamale
just
man.
sweet potatoes? He sells just with sweet
Yeah,
Are they
and
baked? Like baked?
Yes, and
Okay.
I've heard they're fabulous,
Mhm.
but whenever I hear, and he's got like a thin whistle, and
Mhm.
but whenever I hear him, it's usually a time when like I'm like cuddled into the couch and I don't know how
Mhm.
far away he is or whatever. And then
Yes.
there's the tamale man, so there's
Mhm.
always something going on.
Yes, and they have a little bit of loudspeaker or some kind of speaker that they're, like, saying their "tamales, blah, blah," and you hear it. It's not just, like, person, like, walking quietly. It's like, they're like, "Come get my tamales, everybody, come get my tamales," like, over and over.
Over and over. Yeah, and Kat, you're being nice. You're like, "Oh, it's sort of like a loudspeaker." It is a loudspeaker. Like, but it to some degree has sort of blended into the background. I also have the situation of my apartment is beautiful. I love it. But like I can hear my neighbor's dogs turn over on the floor.
Oh, great.
And I'm
Okay.
literally not exaggerating.
Right.
But there's also no parties going on in my building. If
That's
you
good.
if you
Yeah,
added that in, which is
yeah.
something that many people have to deal with. So it's just
Mhm.
a noisy city. And I've chalked it up to like
Oh, no.
exactly, Adelia. It,
Tamales, cebador but I don't remember this. Yeah.
but again, I can only imagine if and when I move somewhere else, I'll probably be like, "It's so quiet. I
Oh,
can't process it."
mm,
And when I was at the height of being so super stressed with work, this would have driven me to distraction. Like, I would have lost my mind.
mm,
Now it's just sort of like, well, if I get awakened in the middle of the night by the dogs, I'll just take a longer nap tomorrow.
mhm, mhm,
Who am I to complain right now, given the life that I've built for myself?
mhm,
So noise might be the closest that I could come to a downside here. But
mhm.
again, I think it's all about perspective.
Right, right. And you're from Philly, so you're used to city living and
Um, from Philly, but
mhm.
hadn't lived in Philly in years.
Okay,
I turned into the, suburban bedroom community living
okay.
person that, many of us had turned into. So,
Mhm,
but again, to me, it's part and parcel. It is a part of the community. I'm sorry, a part of the personality of the city that I've moved
mhm.
to. And yes,
Yeah.
Alicia, it is a symphony of sounds. It's funny. I actually started working on a painting that I am calling cacophony because
Mhm,
that is like I'm listening to music, but in the background is like this cacophony of sounds that is Mexico City. And I'm just letting that kind of be my inspiration on this painting that is going to just be a
mhm.
explosion because it
Nice.
is an explosion of sounds here every day.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. All right, where are we? We are almost at 10 o'clock, and we have a friend who goes live at 10.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if there are any questions, anybody, please put your last questions in. Um, and I'll put in the description a link to your Instagram, also a link to the wait list for the urban retreat in Mexico City this October so that folks can sign up to get notified when the registration opens up. I'm so excited. I'm so happy that we got to talk, and I'm excited to meet you in person
I
finally.
know, I
Yeah.
know. We're
Yeah.
gonna have such a good time in October. I cannot
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that you and Kathy invited me to
Yeah.
participate in that because it's something that I really love to do as a facilitator,
Mhm.
but I also love retreats as a participant as well.
Yes, I know. Yes, we've got a lot of, like, meetups coming in the next year, so I'm excited for it all. Yes. Oh, here's a question, from Keith about the language.
Language has not been a challenge, but I'll tell you, I know it varies. I have a friend here who was very stressed about the language and felt like daily interactions could be stressful, and after going to arrange for some particular service, like I'm just going home, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm worn out. For
Mhm.
me, it just feels like an adventure. And the stress that I had on day-to-day life, like this is
Right.
nothing. And
Right.
people are so gracious. and so supportive. And I try, and that's all that's needed. People like at the OXO, which is like our 7-Eleven,
Mhm.
the checkout person will very often get very frustrated because, they work at a
Right.
7-Eleven, right?
Mhm.
But all in all, it has not been a problem for me.
Mm. Excellent. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Dara. It's been lovely, and I'm so looking forward to playing with some art with you later on this year. And
Should be.
everyone, please subscribe and like this video, and also check out Dara's artwork on Instagram. They're beautiful. So
Thanks, Kat.
thanks, everyone.
All right.
Okay,
Bye, everybody.
bye.